Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about growth. I know a few weeks ago we talked about growing the practice, but today we're going to be talking about your decision to grow the practice and the stages that your practice growth goes through when you decide it's time for each of them. And speaking of growth, as we round out the year, because this episode is airing right here in the middle of December of 2024, we're gearing up for Season 2, which will begin the very first week of January. For the Love of Chiropractic, the entire year will be dedicated to Secrets of My Success. I'll be interviewing some of the biggest best practices in the United States and possibly around the world, and finding out what those doctors think and do for them to be the best practices that they can be. So make sure you tune in and subscribe, but let's get started with today's show. Welcome to another episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I continue to work in a $1 million practice that I built, ran, and sold. I've taught, lectured, and coached our profession and helped so many chiropractors build the practice and the life of their dreams. And now, I want to help you do the same. So here's today's show. As I said in the introduction, on today's show, we're going to be talking about your decision, decide to grow your practice. Now, what's really interesting is a chiropractic practice is a business. As we talked about in previous episodes, we talked about the business of business. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the decisions that you make, the different stages of practice growth. But again, whether you're talking about a practice or any kind of business, the stages and decisions are surprisingly similar. So when we talk about the growth of a practice or a business, there's 5 stages. Now, in one of those stages, there's a decision to make, which can take you back with a repeat loop to start over. But let's start from the very beginning. You decide to start a practice. And I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this podcast made that decision at one time or another, or you're making it right now that you're ready to start your own practice. So when you go to start a practice, there are so many things to think about and look at. And I'm pretty sure virtually every single one of us had an assignment back in chiropractic school to create that practice on paper. So we'd have some idea what the practice really looked like, what the process really looked like, from location, square footage, equipment, color schemes, the things that we had to buy, rent, lease, set up, all the things that needed to be done, as well as hiring, training, systems and procedures, marketing, and somewhere deep down inside we had a philosophy of why we were doing the things that we were doing. But as you put all that into play to start the practice, the first phase of the practice, once you've started it, is growth. How do we grow this thing? And that's a decision. And if you're a good student of growth, business, and opportunity, chances are you tried something and you failed. In fact, maybe you failed miserably, maybe you only failed partially, but it didn't go as well as you expected. I can tell you a quick personal story here. When I first went to open my practice, I set up to do a spinal screening in the local shopping center that was right near where my office was going to be located. In fact, I had already opened the office. And the first 2 days that the office was going to be open, I spent the entire 2 days over at that shopping center, meeting so many people, chatting with so many people, talking about chiropractic care, doing a spinal screening and explaining how I could help them. And in those first 2 days, I had booked 40 new patient appointments. I was thrilled. And all 40 of those people were due to come in over the next 10 days. this week and next week. I was so excited. I had all that information, and after those 2 days, I was psyched and ready and pumped. And I went back to the office, and I was ready, and I had the clipboards and the papers and everything ready for as these patients would start filing in to get them started under care, taking their history, figure out what was going on. And you know what happened? Of those 40 patients that were scheduled over those days, 0 showed up. I wasn't distraught, but I quietly thought, what happened? Obviously, I'm doing something wrong, and that's okay. I knew that I needed to change something. So when you want to grow your practice, when you want to grow any business, when you've decided you're going to grow, figure out what you're going to do and try it out. And if that doesn't work exactly the way that you wanted it to, or maybe it doesn't work at all the way you wanted it to, what you just learned is I've got to do something different. If you're in practice now and you're doing things a certain way and you're getting a certain result and you're not quite satisfied with it, please don't continue doing exactly what you're doing the same way that you're doing it and expect to have a better result. No. I beg you, I challenge you, be willing to do something different. Try something different, because doing something different is going to get you a different result. And that may fail too. Maybe it'll fail more. Maybe it'll fail a little bit less, but you'll be moving in a direction to help hone in where you need to be going and moving. Obviously, the very best way to do this, if it's failed already, or even before you start, is to find somebody who's actually done it. They've done this and they've done it really, really well. And you know what? Pick their brain. You're happy to reach out to me or any other successful chiropractor and ask them, how'd you do this? How'd you make it work? And then go and try it. And then double back and follow up. Do a debrief. What worked, what didn't work. There's certain vocabulary that works better, that turns people on and turns people off. Are you using the right words and phrases to help people get the outcome that they're looking for, which, by the way, gets you the outcome you're looking for, which is to build your business, build your practice to help more people. And as I stated at the beginning of this section, we were talking about there's so many different parts of the practice that need to be all laid out, and we've talked about them on previous episodes. Please go back and check out some of those episodes because there's so much information that will absolutely help you get your practice to where you want it to be. And when we're talking about those different things, the in-office procedures, the training procedures, the staff meetings, one of the most wonderful pieces of advice that I could give anybody is to fall in love with the process. Fall in love with each one of the pieces, the learning of it, the experiencing of it. And by doing that, when you have this enthusiasm, falling in love with working on making it better, the striving to move forward, that's where the success is. It's been said so many times, success is not in the destination, it's in the journey. So learning all along the way and being in love with the process and feeling the growth and the excitement that that brings you, that's the success. One step at a time. And when we talk about these different parts that you can fall in love with, as you've heard me say before, there's only 5 interactions with patients that you even need to master. Each one of them is a masterpiece unto itself. So what are the 5? Well, there's your day 1, all of the things that you do with and for the patient the very first day that they're in the office. And there's a whole episode on that. And then there's the day 2, which is the report of findings with crystal clear communication. And there's a whole episode on that. Then there's also the regular patient visit. That's the third thing and probably the most common. At that point, the patient is in your office. They've become part of your family, the office family, and you're taking them through the course of care that's required through relief, correction, strengthening, and maintenance. And that's the vast majority of the work that you're doing together for the number of visits that they're being seen. And then, of course, there's also the re-examinations and re-reports and how you explain to the patient the process that you're going through, the progress that they've made so far, and that's terrific, and where the next step is to get them to be even more healthy and really enjoying their life. And that fifth interaction actually has two different types. Generically, it's called patient education. So how are you educating them to all the things that chiropractic is and isn't, all the things that chiropractic can do for them versus traditional big pharma and taking drugs for their issues. And it goes back to that very first time you meet the patient, whether it's at a marketing event like a spinal screening or even on the telephone or your website. It's the information that you're giving them then and this is how we can help you with your problems, with your situations, with your health, you, your friends, and your family. So as you work and grow the practice from 0 patients up to a certain level, or wherever you're starting at, and then up to a certain level, that's called the growth phase of the practice. But at some point, it hits a plateau, like a tabletop on a mountain. And that plateau is literally, by definition, you're doing all the things that you're doing them exactly the way that you're doing them, and the practice statistics are rock solid and steady at whatever altitude you have elevated it to. Maybe it's 50 visits a week, maybe it's 100, 200, 400, 800, whatever level you have taken it to, that's where it is. And for most doctors, they stay at that plateau for a very long time. But somewhere along the way, and that's the very purpose of this episode, decide to grow again. Decide to get off the plateau and do something to raise the practice, raise the business again. Don't just keep it at that specific level. Why not serve more people? Why not help more doctors have a place to work to help people? Why not have a bigger voice in your community? Decide to step off that plateau and again, go to the next phase of growth. It would be a shame to be a big successful doctor with a wonderful practice and not pass on the things that you have learned to the next generation of chiropractors, hands-on, with you there in the practice, sharing the tricks and secrets that you've learned over all the years to help the next generation of chiropractors become even more successful than you've been to this point. But that's the growth phase again, as we just said. Step off that plateau. New systems and procedures. If you've been a solo practitioner for so many years and the practice is chugging along just fine and you decide, I'm going to bring in an associate, I think you need to talk to somebody who has had associates and trained associates. Because the worst associate training that I've ever seen is when the doc hires an associate, the associate shows up day 1, and day 2, the senior doc just leaves. No. Work with them and teach them, because that's what most young doctors want. They're looking for someone to ride second chair with, to higher and more success, to learn from the experienced, older, steadied hand. And maybe after one associate in the office, maybe you bring in a second associate. Maybe you open a satellite office or a chain of offices. Maybe you go to surround your entire city with satellite offices, creating a brand name that's recognized all over town because you're that guy, you're that gal. That's who you be. There's a doctor that's going to be a guest in season 2 who's in the process of opening offices all over the country. And he started with one office here on the East Coast of the United States. And he's decided he's going to open multiple offices in virtually every state all across the United States. I'm looking forward to speaking to him and finding out about his secrets of success. What drives him? What decisions has he made to continue growing this company to help as many people, as many doctors, as many communities as he possibly can? That'll be an episode in season 2, and I look forward to you joining us for that one also. And then somewhere along the way, when we talk about the stages of your practice and your career, or the stages of your business, once it's been on that plateau, once you've gone through all of the different growth and change cycles that you choose to go through, at some point you decide it's time to step back. Now that's typically called the decline phase, but that doesn't mean the business is declining necessarily. Of course, if you were only ever the solo doc in practice, seeing your patients, no associates, maybe not even office staff. I've known some very small offices who have done that. As you start to cut back your hours in the solo practice setting, what that means is you truly are in the decline phase. There are fewer patients being seen, the office is open fewer hours, and it becomes less and less and less and less. Unless, of course, you decide to sell the practice, and at which point you've handed it off to somebody else, and then they're in the start and growth phase. And then the final phase, once you've gone through that decline, is you choose to retire. And what does retirement mean as a chiropractor? I don't know. It can mean anything that you want it to mean. You can continue seeing patients. You can continue doing vacation work. You can continue and teach. There's so many different opportunities. But the decision is what we're talking about. Start, grow, plateau. Grow again, branch, grow, and then eventually the decline phase as you start to step back, and retirement. But as you look at your career and where you are currently, decide, is it time for a growth spike? Is it time to step up in the game again? Identify where you are and decide your next step. And as you make those decisions of where you're going next, set goals of what it is you want to accomplish, because now you're playing a game that you can win. You know what the outcome is that you're looking for because you've decided. Don't just coast along like a satellite lost in space. Have a course, have a direction, know where you're going. Step up to the plate, grow, and help as many people as you possibly can, because that's what a doctor does, my friends. All right, and that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at fortheloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.